future. With Pam and John. This SPEDTalk.
Welcome to SPEDTalk with Pam
and John,
also known as the calm
before the storm.
Our purpose is to elevate the conversation and amplify special education resources.
And our why is all about the kids. You know, Pam, there are so many organizations and people around Texas who are just making it happen for kids with disabilities.
So let's make this a platform to celebrate their efforts, because special education is about making the impossible possible. Hey, John. I'm really excited today that we have the dyslexia team from Tdia with us. There's a lot of questions about dyslexia and how to serve students who might be in special education as well as receiving dyslexia services, or those students that are just in 504, who are 504 students receiving dyslexia. So I'm excited. So who do we have in the house with us, John?
Well, you know, it's funny you asked that, Pam. I'll tell you, dyslexia is one of those things that I think people felt like for a while they knew what was going on, and then all of a sudden everybody forgot everything they ever knew and didn't know what was going on, and now we feel like we're back to kind of knowing what's going on, right, in Texas. But it's been a hot topic button, and so I'm so excited today to be able to be SPEDTalking Dyslexia, you know, and we have Dr. Melanie Royal. And Dr. Royal, are you housed in office at Region 10?
Yes, for many years, Region 10 has held a dyslexia grant, I think maybe even from the late 80s. And so they have, we've housed kind of some resources out of there. But over time, we've been able to establish personnel actually in Austin. And so we're so grateful for that, because there's just some things that need to be done, you know, in Austin, and then other things that we can handle, you know, from an ESC standpoint.
Absolutely. And so we're thinking statewide supports, and I know we ESCs break these supports out regionally and provide technical assistance and trainings and such, but I imagine a lot of that flows through yourself, and then, like you said, colleagues at TEA as far as what direction we're moving in. And I see Michelle Reeves from TEA joined us as well.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here today. Yes, I am new pretty much, but I have worked with Melanie for many years. I was at an ESC and as one of the dyslexia specialists. So I am just so excited to be here at TEA and serving as the dyslexia coordinator and the Division of Special Education.
Which ESC?
I was at Region 8.
Oh, okay. I was just being nosy.
Normally that's me, but Pam, you're taking
today.
over my role today.
Exactly, just being nosy. So what do we need to know about dyslexia in Texas?
When we think about dyslexia in Texas, and I'm a little bit older than Michelle, so I've been in the field a little longer, so I can speak from that experience. You know, we have historically in the state of Texas worked with students with dyslexia. And we really, even nationally and internationally, have a very, very strong base of research with Texas Scottish Rite Hospital many, many years ago, establishing the first training center for teachers of dyslexia. So that's, you know, that happened in the 60s and the 70s. As time has gone on, then those of us that went that route in our education field, you know, we've been around for a while. It seems, however, that in the past few years, there's been a stronger presence through guidance and with all of our schools and people asking more questions. And so those of us that have been around for a while, we are grateful for that, because we feel like our students are being addressed more appropriately. Our schools want to know, they're training their general ed staff, they're training their specialists. And so I think it's wonderful to have more focus in this field. And so I would say the state of Texas has addressed dyslexia for many, many years, but we've really upped the game in the last, I would say, 4 to 5 years.
Yeah, and I agree with Melanie. I think just my position that I'm in right now at TEA shows the change in the support that the state's providing. I think one thing that I discovered that I wasn't aware of coming from an ESC to TEA was where dyslexia is a part of many of the divisions at the state level. I work closely with early childhood monitoring division, curriculum. You know, I love the fact that I get to see how dyslexia is interwoven into so many pieces within the state that I had no idea that that was happening. There's lots of things that'll be coming out soon from the Inclusion Network, from TIER, that has information, child find, evaluation, just some great things that are happening that at this level, I'm able to see all that and share that with Melanie. In turn, Melanie shares that with the ESCs, and then that goes to our districts to provide just some amazing guidance that the state is putting together.
Yeah, I have witnessed that, I think, in my career in education and as a special educator for years, you know, that I think, like Dr. Royal said, kind of a, you know, we've done dyslexia for a long time in Texas, and we've had experts such as herself and many others. In Region 12 for years, Lisa Clemens was our little rock star that kept us straight.
Love Lisa.
Yes, yes. And, but, you know, but it always was this special ed +1 kind of thing. You know what I mean? It was like, oh, this, but that we'd always interject with dyslexia. And I think that because of that for years, while we mirrored so much of what we did in many ways regarding practices and procedures and things like that and working with kids, you know, the actual interventions, maybe things like that, were different from what we might do in special ed for a student with a learning disability than from maybe that child with dyslexia that could, you know, there's certain different types of programs and resources and activities that they could engage in and how we would work with that child. And I think as a result of that, that's kind of why maybe we are now realizing, hey, this is not an all or none thing. This is an either or thing. And so I love how the agency has, so Michelle, you said, let me pose a question, because I like to make statements all the time. I don't mean to do that, but you said that your position was kind of a new, or you were new to TEA. Is that because the position is new, the dyslexia position there at TEA that you're holding now?
Yes, and it has changed or morphed from, Terry Lee was here in the position that I'm currently in. And from the time that she left the position to now, and when I took it, or accepted it, I guess is a better word, it has changed from when she was hired. So yeah, and I think Melanie could agree with me. There's lots of changes that are coming, but they're all for the best to meet the needs of our students across the state. So that's a good thing.
So when we're looking at dyslexia, you know, one of the, I guess, the biggest issue has been, you know, where does dyslexia students where are they being served? You know, are they being served through special education, or are they being served through 504? And that's, I think that's one thing our listeners would like to know. How do you make that determination of which type of services should the student receive?
You know, my opening statement with that would be, you know, dyslexia is on a continuum.
Okay.
And so we have to look at the unique needs of the student and where are they and what are those needs. And so oftentimes we do need special education support and services, that student does. And we absolutely want to be sure that they are receiving those. Then other times we may have some situations where maybe the special education support and services are not needed at that time, or they can be successful in more of a 504 oversight or plan. Sometimes we have movement. You know, we may begin in 504 and realize, hey, we've got something, some other underlying condition or some other factor that's weighing in, and let's gather more data. Let's look a little deeper. Let's see what we need to add to this student to help them be successful. And that really is gathering the data on that student and addressing those unique needs. And the reverse of that as well, if, you know, we have a student in special education and we can close that gap, you know, over time, you know, we sometimes then will back off of those supports and services. So again, the continuum, I think, is what we try to keep our eye on is what is the need for that student at the particular point in time. And I'll let Michelle add on to that, as well.
Yeah, I think districts need to just be sure that they're meeting their child find obligations when it comes to dyslexia, and making sure that if they suspect a disability or a need for special education, that they need to do a full evaluation. Or if they don't think there is a need for special education, then they could possibly go the Section 504 route. So again, it's like Melanie was saying too, it's about the unique needs of the student, what that team sees, the data drives, that decision. But again, it's important for districts to make sure that they're following those child find obligations through IDEA. And then, once you look at your identification, then you have your instructional pieces. And in the handbook, we talk about 2 types of instruction. So we have our standard dyslexia protocol, and then our specially designed instruction. So our students who are under 504 are receiving that standard protocol dyslexia instruction. And then our students who are being served under IDA could possibly just be receiving the standard protocol dyslexia instruction, or the specially designed dyslexia instruction, or maybe a combination. Possibly that student who's in special education is participating in the standard protocol dyslexia instruction, but there's some pre-teaching that's going on before they actually go into the standard protocol dyslexia instruction that's provided by the special education teacher.
Okay, and you mentioned the handbook. Is that the Dyslexia Handbook?
Yes, the Dyslexia Handbook.
Okay.
Yeah, in Texas, we just call that the handbook.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure, because there's other handbooks out there, so I just wanted.
Not in Texas, Pam. No, I'm just teasing.
It's kind of on a side note to that is each handbook over time has had a different color, a different cover.
Okay.
And so we would refer to it as the green book, the purple book, the blue
the pink book. Yeah.
Yeah. And, we currently have kind of an orange color, but, each time it's a decision that's made intentionally. What color do we make the cover?
I love that. That is great.
So the handbook, I was just going to ask, so the handbook that's out now is the current handbook. The orange handbook is the most current one, correct?
2018.
2018.
Yes.
So it has not been updated since 2018, right?
Well, there was a lot of updates that rolled in.
I know. Yeah, I just want to
believe.
make sure, because sometimes people look at the dates and they go, "Are you sure that's the most current one?" It's not this one.
The Dyslexia Handbook is overseen by the State Board of Education. And when the State Board of Education calls for an update or a revision, then that comes from that, that board. Okay. And so the last time that was called for was in early 2018. And so committees are formed, they meet, repeatedly, whatever the part of the handbook that needs to be updated, always including any new legislation that maybe has passed since the previous handbook was published. And then when it's all in a draft form, of course, it's posted for public comment and then goes to the state board, and then they, adopt that. And that was adopted in November of 2018.
Okay.
Yes, that would be the most current.
Thank you.
That's good. Yeah. Are there expectations as far as foreseeing any future revisions out there on the horizon right now, or is there not a lot going on? Did we get it done for now in 2018?
Well, there is a lot of new things that do need to be added. So I've heard a little bit of conversation about that, but I don't know that it would happen this school year.
Sure. Yeah.
And again, it would have to go to the state board, and they would call for that.
Okay.
Of course, we know with a new legislative session, there could be something additional added, and we certainly would want to capture that. So,
yeah.
So they follow those bienniums, I would assume. Maybe they track bienniums, and when they can, attach additional changes to that, maybe in kind of that kind of a time frame, maybe.
Certainly, that would be a time to take a look at that, you know, by the state board, and at any point in time, you know, folks can address the board and express, you know, that need or a concern. So that's typically what happens is you'll hear people come to the board and express, you know, a desire or a need for an update. So they do respond to the folks that come to them with requests.
So I was wondering, because, you know, just from a parent's perspective, you know, we throw the word, you know, we talk about dyslexia as if everybody knows what it is. Even when we started our conversation, it was like, oh, let's just jump right in. But so for those who are not sure, what is dyslexia? You know, could either one of you give us a good working definition of what dyslexia is?
Sure. Yeah, we can do that. I'll just read it right out of the handbook. How about that?
That's perfect.
Okay.
The orange one.
Yeah. If I can find the front of mine, that is.
Okay.
In the Texas Education Code and its TEC, I'm just going to go ahead and read that, the 38.003, it defines dyslexia and related disorders in the following way. Dyslexia means a disorder of constitutional origin manifested by the difficulty in learning to read, write, or spell, despite conventional instruction, adequate intelligence, and sociocultural opportunity.
Okay. And so for the layman, what does that mean?
So these students have issues with reading. So reading words in isolation. They have their fluency. They have issues with fluency, spelling, possibly writing, and it just depends on that student. Melanie, you want to add anything in there that I left out?
Well, another on that page that Michelle cited of the handbook, page 1, starts right out with that definition. And the International Dyslexia Association, their definition is a little bit more extensive, but the one Michelle read is the one we have in statute. A couple of the things in the IDA definition is they do state that it's neurobiological in origin, which is the same as constitutional. Mm-hmm. So I want to be clear that this is not something that developed because of an injury, because they didn't have access to good instruction, that there weren't other factors, language acquisition. If they're an EL student, you know, we have to keep in mind that this is the way the brain was actually formed and the way that it processes language, phonological processing and orthographic processing of language. And so those underlying causes really are a domino effect, or have a domino effect on these skills. And so typically we'll see those kids at the very young stages have difficulty with phonological awareness. For example, they may not understand that a letter, that words are even made up of letters or individual sounds. They may have difficulty with rhyming. You know, as young children, we do all the little rhyming stories with our kids, but you know, these children maybe don't seem to have that natural progression of those skills. Those are some early signs. Learning the alphabet. You know, they may sing the alphabet song, they've memorized it, but can they actually say A, B, C, D, put it in sequence? You know, can they remember how to even write their name? And so some of these very early signs are predictors that we want to be sure we don't miss, because they will then impact those other skills. So those early skills, I know we'll probably get into this later, but we now have mandated screening for dyslexia in kindergarten and in first grade. And what they're looking at is those early indicators, so that we can capture those kids early and provide that intervention before they have failure. So we can address those deficit areas. But it definitely has a domino effect on the whole entire reading and writing process.
Mhm.
So who does the screening?
The school district. The
Yeah.
school district does the screening, and in the handbook, in the Dyslexia Handbook, it's outlined in Chapter 2, all the requirements that LEAs have in order to follow the procedures for the screening kinder and first grade students.
So that early identifying, that's really about early intervening, I would assume, is that if we can catch them when they're little and a lot of learning has not, taken place at that point. And so some of these milestones, some of this foundational knowledge, maybe habitual behavior in the learning process, just all these different things, we can mitigate the negative effect of like maybe your brain being wired like for dyslexia, so that later in life, these struggles have gotten larger and larger. Is that kind of what we're looking at? We're hoping to catch it early, remediate where we can, and then kind of change that trajectory a bit on that kid's learning process or life, even in some instances.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we know from research that it is very important that if we catch this early for these kiddos, that it's going to make a huge difference in where they are down the road. For example, I have two sons actually that are dyslexic, and he was not tested until the middle of second grade. So we had this huge gap that we had to fill, and it took almost until his senior year, I think we might still be working on that gap too, to, actually catch him up where he needed to be. But had he been identified earlier, we wouldn't have had such a big gap to fill. So it's critical that we screen these students, as outlined in the handbook, and that we provide services for these kids as early as possible.
Yes. In fact, just to tag onto that early intervention a little bit more, there are researchers in the field, Sally Shaywitz at Yale and Guinevere Eden, where they have conducted functional MRIs of students, and they will take an MRI pre-intervention, and they will find evidence of different parts of the brain maybe not firing like they expected, and then they will provide intervention and then come back at different points in time, and the evidence shows that the brain actually rewires, and different parts of the brain will begin showing that activity, which is just, amazing research that supports that early intervention, or any intervention at any level, but certainly if they're younger, we actually, our dyslexia specialists and therapists, they can make a difference on how that brain processes that language, which I think is just amazing.
Yeah, incredible. And we stress that to our districts too, that early intervention is important, and that these programs that meet the criteria for dyslexia that are in the handbook, they work. They truly work when they're done with fidelity, and it makes a difference. It makes a life-changing difference for these kids.
Absolutely. Pam, I see you got a question. I know you do.
No, I'm just processing everything that's been shared. I mean, I'm just knowing that that intervention does make a difference with the brain is really, awesome.
Incredible. It's amazing,
Yeah.
the research that Sally Shaywitz and many others have done and are doing.
Yeah. So I think sometimes, especially with boys, sometimes it's kind of discarded. So, boys will be boys. They don't like writing.
Yeah.
They don't like to read. It's all, and so they're just kind of, not pushed. Push is the right word, but it's kind of like maybe a little bit more overlooked, as opposed to really looking at how they're learning and that they possibly will need help. So that's where my brain went.
It can be masked by other things, I think is what you're alluding to, is those behaviors that we see, or things that we may attribute to other suspected reasons, may actually go down to the level of they're not learning how to read, and they might be masking that problem to some other type of behavior. Right, certainly.
Yeah, and I mentioned my son again. I have my other son. He was one of the kids that Melanie's talking about. you know, he struggled and we provided intervention for him. He wasn't tested until 3rd grade, but that's where he hit a wall. Just all of a sudden, it's like we couldn't go anywhere beyond where he was. But once he received services, I mean, he, from then on out, was fine.
You know, that's, great example. Wow. You know, I know that's Sharon, you know, Pam and I like to ask a lot of times, what's your personal connection? You know, what is to maybe the project, the network, the area that you support, things like that. And Michelle, I think you just hit it right there with your sons and seeing the difference that the interventions, those evidence-based, research-based interventions can actually make in a child's life. And the earlier, the better. You know, it's really powerful. And I think that a lot of times we just have adults in our systems that just don't know these basic facts. Pam, you hit it right on the head when you said, well, what is dyslexia? The more I think we can help people understand, you know, what dyslexia is. It seems like I've read recently that it's the #1 leading disability of all learning disabilities that there are, and it's so prevalent that we just don't even realize it, and we do attribute it often to boys will be boys, or you know, those kinds of things. And the more that our educators and parents and you know have a basic working knowledge of what is dyslexia, what do I watch for, and if I was to intervene, what would I do? How would I advocate for my child receiving, you know, the intervention services and such?
Well, one of the things that I think we need to also bring to light is that dyslexia is a specific learning disability. And so regardless of where it is on the continuum, it is a specific learning disability. There are specific characteristics, things that we're looking for, the way the brain's processing information. You know, that's different from where our services are delivered. And so we need to, and so there is some research that backs up that of students identified with a specific learning disability in reading, I think 80% of those students that are SLD in reading actually have dyslexia. That's
powerful.
It is the same thing.
Yeah, I remember a few years ago, was in a session with a reading specialist, and she was talking about a young man. He's in middle school, and he was writing in all caps. And they had worked for years to figure out, why, what's going on, why he's writing everything in all caps, in all capital letters. And finally, someone asked him, because they was to think of some mystery. And he finally told him, he said, I don't know the difference between a little b, a little d, a p, a q, but if the small letters, he said, but I know the capital letters. And that's what his coping method was, to write in all caps, because it all looked the same to him. And when you sit there and think about those letters and lower letters, they're basically the same thing, a circle with a stick. Going different direction, And so, but it did take the reading specialist to ask the question. And sometimes it's important to ask the student, what are they seeing when they're reading? What's going on, how the brain processing it, are letters moving, or what, like I said, what they're seeing. And sometimes we forget to ask the person who's really being impacted.
Right, you're right.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Michelle.
I was when she mentioned the word seeing, when you talked about why I am doing what I do, I'm also an adult with dyslexia. It's hereditary. So I have 4 children, and 1 that we never identified for sure, and 2 that were. But when you talk about seeing, I have people ask me all the time, well, how do you see letters? And I, always clear that misconception up that I see exactly what you see. It's a letter sound association, it's breaking down those sounds in that word. And, I'll tell people too, I'm never going to win a spelling bee. Not going to happen. Siri's fantastic. I love her.
Spell check has changed my life, Michelle. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Sometimes spell check doesn't know what I'm writing. So Siri's much nicer.
There you go. I love that. I love that you mentioned that it's hereditary. My dad was dyslexic, and he was highly successful before he passed years ago. And he was a clinical psychologist, and but he had he said he was quite a bit older when he had me. So I remember him saying, you know, if I didn't have a secretary, no one would know anything that I thought or, you know, because but he wrote a letter to me before he passed, just a heartfelt letter. And it was interesting trying to read that letter.
Oh, wow.
Handwriting at 80 years old, you know, was so difficult. But I've often wondered if, but highly intelligent, right? And so I see this so much for students with learning disabilities, with dyslexia. It's not that these kiddos or these individuals are not smart. They're not necessarily intellectually or cognitively disabled. It's just that they have, their brain's wired a little bit different. They learn and process in different ways. And so, you know, I think that hereditary piece, I've always wondered if maybe I have a touch of that dyslexia stuff, because I'll tell you, I was a hard kid to teach when I was a kid. And now to look myself out, I went on and got me a doctorate degree. So, you know, don't count any of them out, because if someone like me can push through and do this, then, man, there's none of them that we should quit on.
It's so interesting.
That's what I tell my boys. I'm sorry, Melanie. I was going to say, that's what I tell, you know, my own boys, you know, look at me. If I can do it, anybody can do it. You just got to keep at it.
Well, I was going to add on my story similar to yours, John, in that my dad, who's now approaching 85, is also dyslexic. When I started in the field, I did not know, you know, really what that was about. I learned and was trained and became a certified academic language therapist. And after that point, I started seeing some of those characteristics, you know, in my own dad. I thought he was just, you know, not a very good speller, but over time came to light that actually he as well has dyslexia. And I think he was in his 70s before he really put a name to what that was. And now over many, many conversations, he owns it. You know, he didn't really want to talk about it at first. And I said, but Dad, you need to talk about it, because you need to show, like your dad, John, that you can be successful because you are a smart person, and look at all that you've done and all that you've achieved. His story is somebody like your dad who, despite not having the right instruction, they still were able to persevere.
Yes.
The good thing is now that Michelle's children and my own don't have dyslexia, but, you know, I have grandchildren that are, you know, coming along now and are little bitty, but I'm watching them and I'm aware of what are the things that they're learning. And I'm going to have a little bit more of an eagle's eye on those kids to see whether we need to be doing something early on, but it definitely can skip generations. Could be a cousin, you know, it doesn't even have to be in a direct line, but so we've certainly come a long way from when our dads were in school, and they didn't address it at all. They didn't even have a name for it.
Right. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. I think my dad only knew because he enlisted in the military at 20 or 18, 19,
yes, and
fought in the Korean War. But he said that the only reason he knew that he was colorblind and that he was had dyslexia is because they screened that out so they could get him in. Because they said, well, you are a smart guy. Why can't you get in here? And so the ASFAB was or whatever back there, they figured it out and they said, okay, we got you. We know what you are. But you know what? Those won't exclude you. Get in here.
Yeah, you're coming anyway.
He would have probably never known back in those days. So it's interesting. Well, Pam, where are we at?
Well, I was going to ask Melanie and Michelle, is there anything else you all would like to share with us? We've kind of went all over the place today. So we'll make sure we didn't leave anything out that you feel that's important for our listener.
You want to talk about the TDIA modules, and then I can talk about the other TDIA
Yeah, we'd
modules.
certainly like for our listeners to be aware of some of the supports that we have for teachers, even pre-service teachers. There's a module at Region 10, pre-service teachers, where there's a statute that if you're in an educator prep program, that the characteristics, instructional strategies must be included in that program. So we have a course for that. We have quite a few people actually take that course each year. And then teachers do have certificates, they additionally have a requirement whereby they must take a certain number of hours of CPE on dyslexia. So our general ed teachers have that requirement. And then of course the other level where we have our dyslexia specialists, you know, our administrators, we have supports for them. One of the things that we have rolled out for the past several years are the Texas Dyslexia Identification Academy. It's a series of 5 modules whereby we go through the identification evaluation process, or I should say evaluation first and then identification. And module 1 is more of a foundations course. So a lot of our general ed staff will jump in on that one. It's a face-to-face and it's also offered in an online format. And we have those modules currently undergoing an update, and just to make sure that they're following all current research and guidance that we have. And we're going to add also another module specifically addressing dysgraphia. And then we'll also address more specifically screening, because we have those 2 chapters in our handbook. So those are some things that are rolling out this fall, and we're excited about those. And there's a couple other things I think Michelle can address, probably the one by American Institute of Research more appropriately than I can.
So TEA has another project, and it's the Dyslexia Project, and it's one training, but it has 4 modules, and it's all about dyslexia, and it also will be coming out this fall. There is a great document that is actually on the Dyslexia and Related Disorders website that might be beneficial for LEAs if they want to make sure that they're following all of the guidelines that they're supposed to be following for dyslexia and related disorders. And it's called the Dyslexia Essential Components Worksheet. And like I said, it's on I think you guys had mentioned some websites. I have a ton of websites that I'd love to share with you, because also in the Inclusion Network, they have reading and math trainings that they have been doing that they'll be presenting to teachers that address working with students who have dyslexia. Our Child Find Network is working on evaluation processes for dyslexia, and that's coming out soon. And then also the Tier Network has some information out there about, you know, MTSS, but also there was a virtual training that they showed, I think it was Monday, and it's a teacher who's actually doing virtual dyslexia intervention, and that is out there. So there's some great things out there that TEA has in place. And like I said, I'd love to share links with you because, you know, it'd be too hard to spell them all out. But let's see if there were some other ones here that I wanted to share as well. Of course, the Dyslexia and Related Disorders website. Lots of great information there about dyslexia. The special education website is a go-to. The early childhood education site, especially when we're looking at screening and types of assessments. So there's lots of good information there. Child Find, which I mentioned earlier, 504 guide. Like I said, TA has a ton of resources. Already mentioned the Inclusion Network. And there's also Students with Disabilities Planning Supports Guidebook, and it addresses dyslexia on page 30. So that's just a perfect example of when I said at the beginning, TEA is working really hard to support our students across the state with dyslexia, and we are interwoven in all of the divisions within the agency.
Yeah,
And want to be sure to give a shout out also, we mentioned the education service centers, you know, early on. Every one of our ESCs has a dyslexia consultant, a designated dyslexia consultant, and several of them actually have 2. Many of these guidance documents, these trainings like the TDIA, these folks are trained in those. So they really are the ones that turn around, and they're the boots on the ground with our LEAs. We know the people at the LEAs, they have relationships with them. And so we very commonly will tell folks, if they're calling myself or Michelle, we'll say, reach out to Region 12, reach out to Region 9,
Yeah.
Talk to so-and-so. If I have an email, I'll CC that person at that region center, because they are the ones that filter this down. They're always developing new trainings, and they're just an incredible group of very passionate people who are constantly learning.
Mm-hmm.
And the guidance that comes from TEA filters down through them.
Yes.
So I would encourage everyone that's listening to be sure that you connect with your regional ESC person and see what they've got going on, because they do some wonderful trainings.
Yes, like Melanie's right. They have a lot to add and a lot of trainings out there for all their LEAs.
Yeah, I know that we have, like I mentioned, Lisa Flemings for years down here in Region 12, and when she stepped away, we thought, where are we going to ever find another person qualified to come in and, you know, having that CALT certification, all that kind of stuff. And then in walked Tracy, and since then, Tracy Newman, she has been a rock star for us. And so, you know, they're really, it's a nuanced area. There's a lot of need for expertise, but I'll tell you, our ESCs are getting it done as well as TEA.
And the one other thing, I know I keep adding on things, but I keep thinking of things. I want to be sure to mention our state dyslexia helpline. We have a 1-800 number, 1-800-232-3030. And we receive hundreds of calls and emails every year through the helpline. And that is available to anyone statewide, parents, administrators, teachers. I answer that primarily in my role at Region 10, but you know, sometimes we'll filter it on maybe to another department. Many times Michelle and I will collaborate on those answers, or she might even be getting an email as well as myself. So we do collaborate quite a bit on those, but that dyslexia helpline is meant to be a resource to anyone, parents, service center folks, you know, any level of instructor or teacher.
That's great to know.
Available. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great to know. It's synonymous to me in my brain, the way it processes, if they can kind of like the sped text for special ed questions. And then you have that dyslexia hotline if it's specific to dyslexia.
Yes. And sometimes I will refer to SPEDTalk, or they will refer back to dyslexia. So again, that continuum of services, you know, we have so many overlapping resources. Just knowing what those are is sometimes a little bit daunting, but you know, keeping that straight and just letting the folks know that, okay, look at this document, this guidance, watch this webinar, and letting them know that those things are out there, because it can be a little overwhelming, especially for parents, perhaps maybe of a newly identified, you know, student with dyslexia. It can be quite overwhelming just taking in all that information anyway. So,
do we have any more questions or any more comments? Anything else you want to add? Like you both have survived SPEDTalking.
Pam, I think we've gotten it done. I mean, I feel like Dr. Royal and Michelle Reeves from Tdia have really given us just tons of resources, some cool ideas really of how to really hone our focus and really look for those specific areas to pay attention to when it comes to trying to assess whether or not maybe a child may have those characteristics of dyslexia, and really how to be proactive and move forward as a parent, as a teacher, and even as a student, and identify, you know, how can I overcome and potentially even rewire that brain, it sounds like. So
right.
We just want to thank y'all for coming on and SPEDTalking Dyslexia today. This was a super awesome episode. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank
you for having us.
To continue to elevate the conversation, hit us up on Twitter at SPEDTalk 2020, where you can find links to all of our episodes and each of the resources that we discussed today.
John also links to the resources will be available at our podcast site.
And if you found these resources helpful, be sure to share them with a friend, because information should always flow through us, not to us.
That will do it for this episode of SPEDTalk.
And remember, courage creates culture and kindness keeps us connected.
Until the next time, I'm Pam.
And I've been John.
And this is
SPEDTalk.
Elevate the concept.
Living in the moment, and the moment is the future.
Begin with